The massive starship Celestial Voyager drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space. Its sleek, silvery hull gleamed under the light of distant stars. Inside, the ship buzzed with activity. Aliens of various shapes and sizes moved about, each focused on their tasks. Captain Zorn stood on the bridge, his 4 eyes scanning the numerous screens before him. His skin, a pale shade of blue, glistened under the soft glow of the ship's lights. He felt proud of his diverse crew and their important mission to explore new galaxies. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared through the ship. Red lights flashed, bathing everything in an eerie glow. The calm atmosphere turned to chaos in seconds. "What's happening?" Captain Zorn shouted, his voice barely audible over the alarm. Lieutenant Vix, a small furry creature with 6 arms, frantically tapped at her console. "Captain, we're losing power," she squeaked. "All systems are shutting down." The ship lurched violently, throwing several crew members off their feet. Captain Zorn grabbed onto his chair to stay upright. The lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into darkness. Only the emergency lights remained, casting long shadows across the worried faces of the crew. "Status report," Zorn demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Main engine offline," reported Kraz, the ship's engineer. His long, tentacle-like fingers danced across his workstation. "Backup systems failing. Life support. It's barely functioning, Captain." Zorn felt a chill run down his spine. Without life support, they were as good as dead. "Can we send a distress signal?" Vix shook her head, her fur standing on end. "Communications are down, sir. We're cut off." The reality of their situation began to sink in. They were stranded in the middle of nowhere, their ship crippled, with no way to call for help. Panic started to spread among the crew. "What about nearby planets?" Zorn asked, desperate for any solution. "Negative, Captain," replied the navigation officer. Blip. His single eye blinked rapidly as he checked his instruments. "The nearest habitable planet is light years away. We'd never make it, even if our engines were working." The ship groaned, as if feeling their despair. Metal creaked and strained, making everyone flinch. They all knew that the vacuum of space was just on the other side of the hull, waiting to rush in at the slightest weakness. "There must be something we can do," Zorn muttered, more to himself than to his crew. He refused to accept that this was how their mission would end. Just then, a small voice piped up from the back of the bridge. Excuse me." All eyes turned to see Pip, the youngest member of the crew. The small green alien looked nervous but determined. "What about the human?" For a moment, there was silence. Then murmurs broke out among the crew. They had almost forgotten about their single human passenger, the Deathworlder. Kraz asked, his voice filled with doubt. What could he possibly do? Captain Zorn considered the idea. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as Deathworlders, creatures from a planet so harsh that most aliens considered it uninhabitable. They were often seen as dangerous and unpredictable, but they were also known for their resourcefulness. "It's worth a try," Zorn decided. "Pip, go find the human. Bring him to the engine room." As Pip scurried off, Zorn turned to his crew. "I know we're in a dire situation," he said, his voice firm. "But we're not done yet. We'll find a way out of this. Together." The crew nodded, taking heart from their captain's words. But doubt still lingered in their eyes. They all wondered, could a single human really save them from this crisis? As they waited, the ship continued to drift, a tiny speck of life in the vast, uncaring expanse of space. The crew of the Celestial Voyager could only hope that help would come before it was too late. Little did they know, their adventure was just beginning. The human they had dismissed as a simple passenger was about to show them why Deathworlders had earned their fearsome reputation, and perhaps changed their view of the galaxy forever. The tension on the bridge of the Celestial Voyager was thick enough to cut with a knife. Captain Zorn paced back and forth, his 4 eyes darting nervously between the various emergency displays. The rest of the alien crew watched anxiously, their diverse forms huddled in small groups, whispering among themselves. Suddenly, the door to the bridge hissed open. All eyes turned to see Pip, the young green alien, enter. Behind him stood a tall figure that made several crew members gasp and step back. The human walked onto the bridge, his presence immediately commanding attention. He was muscular and broad-shouldered, towering over most of the alien crew. His skin was a shade they'd never seen before, and a mop of dark hair sat atop his head. But what struck them most were his eyes, keen and alert, taking in every detail of the situation. "This is Jake Cooper," Pip announced, his voice squeaking slightly. "He's our human passenger." Jake nodded to the crew, his face serious. "I heard you folks are having some trouble," he said, his deep voice breaking the silence. "Mind if I take a look?" Captain Zorn stepped forward, trying to hide his unease. He'd never been this close to a human before. "Mr. Cooper," he said, "we appreciate your offer, but I'm not sure how you can help. Our ship's systems are failing, and we're stranded in deep space." Jake's lips curved into a slight smile. "Captain, with all due respect, you'd be surprised what a human can do in a pinch. I'm an engineer by trade. If you'll let me, I'd like to see your engine room." The alien crew exchanged glances. They'd heard stories about humans, tales of their incredible endurance, their ability to survive in conditions that would kill most species. But they'd also heard about their unpredictability, their capacity for violence. Kraz, the ship's engineer, spoke up. "Captain, this is ridiculous. What can this Deathworlder possibly do that I haven't already tried?" Jake turned to Kraz, his expression calm but determined. "You've got technology I've never seen before," he admitted. "But sometimes a fresh pair of eyes can spot something others might miss. And where I come from, we're pretty good at improvising." Captain Zorn considered for a moment. They were running out of options, and time was not on their side. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, Mr. Cooper, you may examine our engines, but Kraz will accompany you." As Jake and Kraz left the bridge, murmurs broke out among the crew. Some expressed hope, while others voiced skepticism and fear. "Can we really trust him?" Lieutenant Vix asked, her fur standing on end. "Humans are so volatile." "We don't have much choice," Captain Zorn replied, his voice heavy. "Our options are limited, and our time is running out." Down in the engine room, Jake's eyes widened as he took in the alien technology. Glowing tubes pulsed with strange energies, and holographic displays flickered with symbols he'd never seen before. But beneath the exotic tech, he could see familiar principles at work. "Impressive," he muttered, running a hand along a coolant pipe. "Your power generation must be incredibly efficient." Kraz watched the human warily, his tentacles twitching. "It was," he said, "until everything started failing. I've tried every standard repair procedure, but nothing works." Jake nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Sometimes the solution isn't standard," he said. "On Earth, we have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention." He began to move around the engine room, asking Kraz questions about various systems and components. The alien engineer was surprised by the humans' quick grasp of their technology. As they worked, the ship groaned again, the sound echoing ominously through the metal corridors. A warning light flashed on a nearby panel. "That's not good," Jake said, his voice grim. "Looks like we're losing hull integrity in Section 7. Kraz's eyes widened in alarm. "But that's impossible. The hull is designed to withstand." "Wait, how did you read that? You shouldn't be able to understand our language." Jake shrugged. "I've always been good with patterns. Listen, we don't have much time. I think I know what's wrong, but fixing it won't be easy. Or safe." He turned to face Kraz, his expression deadly serious. "I'm going to need a spacesuit. And your trust." Kraz stared at the human, realizing that their fate now rested in the hands of this strange, intimidating creature from a world they barely understood. Little did he know, Jake Cooper was about to show them exactly why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's ultimate survivors. Kraz led Jake to the equipment room, his tentacles trembling slightly. The human's bold plan had left him feeling both hopeful and terrified. As they entered, Jake's eyes scanned the array of alien spacesuits hanging on the wall. "These won't do," Jake muttered, examining the suits designed for various alien anatomies. "None of these will fit me, and they're not made for the kind of work we need to do." Kraz's eye stalks drooped. "Then it's hopeless," he said. "We can't repair the ship from the outside without proper protection." Jake's brow furrowed in thought. Then his eyes lit up with an idea. "Maybe we can modify one," he suggested. "Do you have any tools in here? And spare parts?" Confused but curious, Kraz showed Jake to a workbench covered in strange devices. The human immediately got to work, his hands moving with surprising speed and skill. He combined parts from different suits, rewired systems, and even cannibalized some of the ship's non-essential equipment. As Jake worked, he explained his plan to Kraz. "The main problem is in the ship's external power couplings," he said. "They've been damaged by some kind of space debris. We need to reconnect them manually, but it means going outside the ship." Kraz's tentacles waved in distress. "But that's suicide," he exclaimed. "The vacuum of space, the extreme temperatures, the radiation." Jake nodded grimly. "For most species, yes. But humans, we're built a little tougher. With this modified suit, I think I can survive out there long enough to make the repairs." Hours passed as Jake worked tirelessly on the suit. The ship's condition continued to deteriorate, with more systems failing by the minute. Captain Zorn visited several times, his anxiety growing with each passing moment. Finally, Jake held up the finished product. It was a patchwork creation, combining parts from several alien suits with makeshift human innovations. It looked strange, even ugly, but Jake's eyes shone with pride. "It's ready," he announced. "Now for the hard part." As Jake suited up, Captain Zorn addressed the crew over the ship's remaining functional speakers. "Attention all hands," his voice crackled. "Our human guest, Mr. Cooper, has volunteered for a dangerous mission to save our ship. Please report to your designated safe areas and prepare for possible decompression." The gravity of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. As Jake made his way to the airlock, crew members lined the corridors, watching in a mixture of awe and fear. Some offered words of encouragement, while others simply stared, still unsure whether to trust this Deathworlder with their lives. At the airlock, Jake did one final check of his cobbled-together suit. Kraz stood nearby, monitoring the ship's failing systems on a portable device. "You don't have to do this," Kraz said quietly. "It's not your ship, not your problem." Jake smiled behind his helmet's faceplate. "Where I come from, we don't turn our backs on people in need," he replied. "Besides, I'm kind of curious to see if this crazy suit will actually work." With a hiss, the inner airlock doors sealed shut. Jake took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He knew the risks. One mistake, one tear in his makeshift suit, and it would be over in seconds. Opening outer airlock door, Kraz's voice came through the suit's comm system. "Good luck, Jake, and thank you." The outer door slid open, revealing the vast, star-filled void of space. For a moment, Jake stood frozen, awed by the sight. Then, with a determined nod, he activated his suit's magnetic boots and stepped out onto the hull of the celestial Voyager. The cold of space immediately seeped through his suit, making him shiver. Warnings flashed across his helmet display, showing the extreme conditions his body was enduring. But Jake pushed the discomfort aside, focusing on the task at hand. He began to make his way across the ship's hull, each step careful and measured. The damaged power couplings were just ahead, barely visible in the dim starlight. As he worked, the entire alien crew watched through various viewports and camera feeds, holding their breath. They were witnessing something they had thought impossible, a human walking in open space with nothing but a homemade suit protecting him from certain death. Little did they know, Jake's greatest challenge was yet to come. The simple repair was about to turn into a fight for survival that would push even a Deathworlder to his limits. Jake's breath fogged up his helmet as he carefully made his way across the ship's hull. The vastness of space surrounded him, an endless sea of stars stretching in every direction. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but the sheer beauty and terror of his situation threatened to overwhelm him. "How's it looking out there, Jake?" Kraz's voice crackled through the comm. "Cold," Jake replied, his teeth chattering slightly. "But I'm managing. I can see the damaged couplings just ahead." As he approached the couplings, Jake could see the problem immediately. A piece of space debris had torn through the delicate mechanisms, leaving a mess of twisted metal and severed wires. "It's worse than we thought," Jake reported. "This isn't going to be a quick fix." Inside the ship, Captain Zorn and the crew listened anxiously to Jake's assessment. The captain's 4 eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of his growing stress. "How long do you need?" Zorn asked, his voice tense. Jake considered for a moment. "An hour, maybe 2, but..." Suddenly, a shrill alarm blared through the ship's speakers. Kraz's panicked voice came over the comm. "Jake, we've got a problem. A solar flare is heading our way. You've got less than 30 minutes before it hits." Jake's heart raced. Solar flares were dangerous enough for a fully functional ship. For someone exposed in space with only a makeshift suit for protection, it could be deadly. "Can you get back inside?" Captain Zorn asked urgently. Jake looked at the damaged couplings, then back at the airlock. If he retreated now, the ship would be defenseless against the flare. But if he stayed... "Negative," Jake said, his voice firm. "I'm staying out here. We won't get another chance at this." Ignoring the protests from the crew, Jake set to work. His hands moved quickly, reconnecting wires and realigning components. The suit's internal temperature began to rise as its cooling systems struggled against the increasing solar radiation. Warning messages flashed across Jake's helmet display. "Radiation levels critical." The suit's computer warned. "Recommend immediate evacuation." Jake gritted his teeth and kept working. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. He blinked it away, focusing on the task at hand. Inside the ship, the crew watched in awe and horror. They had never seen anyone work with such determination in the face of certain death. 10 minutes until the flare hits, Kraz announced, his voice shaking. Jake's fingers were starting to go numb from the cold of space seeping through his gloves. He fumbled with a delicate wire, almost dropping it into the void. "Come on," he muttered to himself. "You can do this." As the minutes ticked by, Jake's suit began to fail. First, the external sensors went dark. Then, the cooling system sputtered and died. The heat inside the suit became almost unbearable. "Jake, you need to come back now," Captain Zorn ordered. "That's an order." But Jake didn't respond. He was entirely focused on the final connections. His vision was starting to blur, his lungs burning with each breath. 30 seconds to impact, Kraz shouted. With a final burst of effort, Jake connected the last wire. "It's done," he gasped into the comm. "Try it now." Inside the ship, Kraz frantically inputted commands. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the ship's systems began to come back online. "It's working," Kraz exclaimed. "Shields are up." A cheer went up from the crew, but it was short-lived. "Jake, get back inside now," Captain Zorn commanded. Jake turned towards the airlock, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The radiation and extreme conditions had taken their toll. He stumbled, his magnetic boots barely keeping him attached to the hull. The solar flare struck just as Jake reached the airlock. A wave of intense radiation washed over the ship. The shields flickered but held. As the outer airlock door closed behind Jake, he collapsed to the floor. The last thing he heard before losing consciousness was the sound of the crew rushing to his aid. The Deathworlder had saved the ship, but at what cost? As the medical team rushed to treat Jake's injuries, the alien crew realized they had witnessed something extraordinary, a display of courage and determination unlike anything they had ever seen before. The medical bay of the Celestial Voyager buzzed with frantic activity. Jake Cooper lay unconscious on a bed, surrounded by alien medical equipment that beeped and whirred. Dr. Excel, the ship's chief medical officer, hovered over him, her 6 eyes blinking rapidly as she assessed his condition. "I've never treated a human before," Dr. Excel muttered, her antenna twitching nervously. "Their biology is so different." Captain Zorn stood nearby, his face etched with concern. "Will he survive, Doctor?" Dr. Excel's mandibles clicked uncertainly. "It's hard to say, Captain. The radiation exposure was severe. For any other species, it would have been fatal. But humans, they're remarkably resilient." As if on cue, Jake's eyes fluttered open. He groaned, trying to sit up but finding himself too weak. "Did it work?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. The aliens in the room exchanged surprised looks. Captain Zorn stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder. "Yes, Mr. Cooper. Thanks to you, the ship is safe. You saved us all." Jake managed a weak smile before closing his eyes again, exhausted. Over the next few days, the crew of the Celestial Voyager watched in amazement as Jake's condition improved rapidly. His body seemed to be healing itself at an astonishing rate, further cementing the aliens' awe of human resilience. By the 4th day, Jake was well enough to sit up and talk. The medical bay had become a popular spot for off-duty crew members, all curious to see the human who had risked his life to save them. Kraz was a frequent visitor, often bringing bits of technology for Jake to tinker with as he recovered. The alien engineer had developed a newfound respect for human ingenuity. "I still can't believe you modified our suits like that," Kraz said, his tentacles waving in excitement. "It shouldn't have been possible." Jake shrugged, wincing slightly at the movement. "Necessity is the mother of invention, remember. When your back's against the wall, you'd be surprised what you can come up with." As Jake's strength returned, Captain Zorn decided it was time to address the crew. He called a ship-wide meeting in the main hall, with Jake as the guest of honor. The hall was packed, aliens of all shapes and sizes crammed in to hear their captain speak. Jake stood on the stage next to Zorn, still a bit unsteady on his feet, but determined to stand tall. "Crew of the Celestial Voyager," Captain Zorn began, his voice echoing through the hall. "We faced a crisis that nearly cost us our lives and our mission. But thanks to the bravery and ingenuity of our human guest, Jake Cooper, we are alive to continue our journey." A cheer went up from the assembled crew. Jake felt his face flush, unused to such attention. Zorn continued, "Mr. Cooper's actions have shown us that our preconceptions about humans, about Deathworlders, were misguided. We saw them as dangerous, unpredictable. But Jake has shown us that humans are also capable of great courage, resourcefulness, and selflessness." The captain turned to Jake, all 4 of his eyes filled with respect. "Mr. Cooper, on behalf of the entire crew, I thank you. You will always have a place among us, should you wish it." Jake stepped forward, a little overwhelmed by the moment. He cleared his throat and addressed the crowd. "I appreciate the honor, Captain, but I didn't do anything special. Where I come from, we believe in helping others, no matter the risk. It's just what humans do." His words were met with another round of cheers and applause. As Jake looked out over the sea of alien faces, he realized something had changed. The fear and suspicion he had first encountered were gone, replaced by genuine warmth and acceptance. As the celebration continued, Jake found himself surrounded by curious crew members, all eager to learn more about humans and their ways. He answered their questions patiently, smiling at their wonder and occasionally correcting some of the more outlandish misconceptions about Earth. For the first time since boarding the Celestial Voyager, Jake felt truly at home. He had not only saved the ship but had also bridged a gap between species, paving the way for a new understanding between humans and aliens. Little did Jake know, his adventure aboard the celestial Voyager was far from over. The universe had more challenges in store, and his newfound alien friends would soon need his unique human perspective once again. As the celestial Voyager continued its journey through the cosmos, life aboard the ship settled into a new normal. Jake Cooper had become an integral part of the crew, his human perspective and problem-solving skills proving invaluable time and time again. One quiet afternoon, as Jake was helping Kraz in the engine room, the ship's alarms suddenly blared to life. Red lights flashed, and Captain Zorn's voice came over the intercom. All hands to battle stations. Unknown vessel approaching. Jake and Kraz exchanged worried glances before rushing to the bridge. When they arrived, they found the crew in a state of controlled chaos. Captain Zorn stood at the center, his 4 eyes fixed on the main view screen. "Report," Zorn commanded as Jake and Kraz entered. Lieutenant Vix's fur stood on end as she responded. "Captain, it's a Zargan warship. They're not responding to our hails." A collective gasp went through the bridge. The Zargans were known throughout the galaxy as ruthless pirates and slavers. Even the most advanced ships feared an encounter with them. Jake stepped forward, studying the image of the approaching ship on the screen. Its hull was dark and menacing, covered in weapon ports. "What are our options, Captain?" he asked. Zorn's face was grim. "Our weapons are no match for theirs, and we can't outrun them. I fear we may have to surrender to save the crew." Jake's mind raced. He couldn't let these aliens he'd come to call friends fall into the hands of slavers. "Wait," he said, an idea forming. "What if we could trick them?" All eyes turned to Jake. "What do you mean, human?" Zorn asked, a glimmer of hope in his voice. Jake grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. "On Earth, we have a saying. If you can't beat them, join them, or in this case, make them think we're one of them." Over the next few minutes, Jake outlined his plan. It was risky, borderline insane by alien standards, but it was their only chance. Captain Zorn, seeing no better option, agreed. The crew sprang into action. Under Jake's guidance, they began modifying the ship's external appearance using holographic projectors. The sleek, scientific vessel slowly transformed into a battered, menacing warship. "Now for the finishing touch," Jake said, turning to Kraz. "We need to make it look like we're damaged. Can you vent some plasma from the engines? Make it look like we're limping." Kraz's tentacles waved in excitement. "Brilliant. I can do that, but it'll weaken our actual engines." "It's a risk we'll have to take," Jake replied. As the Zargan ship drew nearer, the celestial Voyager, now disguised as a beaten-up pirate vessel, began to vent plasma. To any observer, it looked like a ship that had just barely survived a fierce battle. "They're hailing us," Vix announced, her paws trembling slightly. Jake stepped forward. "Let me handle this," he said, straightening his posture and putting on his best scowl. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the fearsome visage of the Zargan captain. Its scale-covered face twisted in confusion at the sight of Jake. "What manner of creature are you?" the Zargan growled. Jake didn't miss a beat. "I'm a human, you scale-brained idiot," he snarled, channeling every tough guy character he'd ever seen in movies. "We're new to this sector, and we don't take kindly to trespassers. Back off, or we'll show you why they call us Deathworlders." The Zargan captain's eyes widened. It had clearly heard the fearsome rumors about humans. A Deathworlder. Here, Jake leaned in closer to the screen, his voice low and menacing. "That's right. And we've got a whole crew of the meanest, nastiest aliens this side of the galaxy. So unless you want to tangle with beings that eat Zargans for breakfast, I suggest you turn that oversized tugboat around and crawl back to whatever slimy hole you came from." For a tense moment, silence reigned. Then, to everyone's amazement, the Zargan ship began to turn away. We meant no disrespect." The Zargan captain stammered. "We'll leave your territory immediately." As the enemy ship disappeared into the distance, the bridge erupted in cheers. Jake found himself engulfed in a mass of tentacles, fur, and scales as the alien crew hugged him in gratitude. Captain Zorn approached Jake, all four of his eyes shining with admiration. "Mr. Cooper, that was remarkable. How did you know that would work?" Jake chuckled, feeling the adrenaline start to fade. "I didn't, but sometimes a good bluff is all you need. That, and a reputation for being the scariest species in the galaxy." As the crew celebrated their narrow escape, Jake couldn't help but smile. He had found more than just a place among the stars. He had found a family, one that accepted him for all his human quirks and abilities, and together, there was no challenge they couldn't face. As the celestial Voyager continued its journey through the cosmos, news of Jake's heroic deeds spread quickly. The human who had saved an alien crew and outsmarted feared pirates became a legend in this sector of space. But for Jake, life aboard the ship had become comfortably routine. One day, as Jake was enjoying a meal in the ship's mess hall with Kraz and Vix, Captain Zorn's voice came over the intercom. "Senior crew and Mr. Cooper, please report to the bridge immediately." Exchanging curious glances, they hurried to the bridge. When they arrived, they found Captain Zorn standing before a large holographic display, his expression serious. "We've received a distress signal," Zorn announced as they gathered around. "It's from a small research outpost on a nearby planet. They're under attack by an unknown force." The hologram showed a small rocky planet orbiting the dim red star. A blinking red dot indicated the location of the outpost. "What kind of attack?" Jake asked, leaning in to study the display. Zorn's four eyes blinked rapidly. "That's the strange part. They describe the attackers as shadows, living shadows that can pass through walls." A shiver ran through the alien crew. Vix's fur stood on end, and Kraz's tentacles twisted nervously. "Shadows." Jake frowned. "That doesn't make any sense. Unless," his eyes widened as an idea struck him, "unless they're not from our dimension." The aliens looked at him in confusion. Jake quickly explained, "On Earth, we have theories about parallel dimensions existing alongside our own. What if these shadows are actually beings from another dimension, somehow crossing over into ours?" Captain Zorn considered this for a moment. "It's as good an explanation as any. But how do we fight something we can't touch?" Jake grinned, his mind already racing with possibilities. "We might not be able to touch them, but I bet we can affect them with energy. Kraz, what's the strongest energy field we can generate?" Kraz's tentacles waved excitedly as he caught on to Jake's idea. "We could modify the ship's shields to project a high-intensity electromagnetic pulse, but we'd have to get very close to the planet's surface." "It's risky," Captain Zorn said, "but it might be our only chance to save those researchers. Mr. Cooper, I'm putting you in charge of this mission. What do you need?" Over the next few hours, Jake worked with Kraz and the engineering team to modify the ship's systems. They converted one of the cargo bays into a makeshift lab, filling it with every piece of energy-emitting equipment they could spare. As they approached the planet, tension filled the air. Through the view screen, they could see dark, swirling shapes moving across the planet's surface, converging on a small dome-like structure. The research outpost. "Take us in close," Jake commanded, standing at the center of the bridge. "Kraz, be ready with that electromagnetic pulse." The celestial Voyager descended through the planet's atmosphere, shaking as it encountered turbulence. The shadow creatures seemed to notice their approach, some breaking off from the attack on the outpost to swarm towards the ship. "Now, Kraz," Jake shouted. Kraz slammed his tentacle down on a large button. A wave of blue energy erupted from the ship, spreading out in all directions. As it washed over the shadow creatures, they seemed to vibrate, their forms becoming unstable. "It's working," Vix exclaimed, her ears perked up in excitement. But their victory was short-lived. The shadows quickly regrouped, seeming to adapt to the energy pulse. They resumed their attack on both the outpost and the ship with renewed ferocity. "They're learning," Jake muttered. "We need something stronger, something they can't adapt to." Suddenly, his eyes lit up. "Light. Kraz, can we overload the ship's exterior lights?" Kraz looked uncertain. "We could, but it might fry our systems. We'd be stranded here." Jake nodded grimly. "It's a risk we'll have to take, Captain." Captain Zorn didn't hesitate. "Do it." With a few quick commands, Kraz redirected all available power to the ship's external lighting systems. The celestial Voyager lit up like a miniature sun, bathing the entire area in blindingly bright light. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The shadow creatures writhed and dissipated, unable to maintain their form in the intense illumination. Within minutes, they had vanished completely. As the light faded, a cheer went up from the crew. They had saved the research outpost and potentially discovered a new form of life. All thanks to Jake's quick thinking and the crew's trust in him. But as the adrenaline of the moment faded, reality set in. The ship's systems were fried, leaving them stranded on this alien world. As Captain Zorn began organizing repair efforts, Jake stared out at the alien landscape, a mix of excitement and apprehension filling him. This was just the beginning of a new adventure, one that would test not only his ingenuity but also the bonds he had formed with his alien crew. The Deathworlder's journey among the stars was far from over.